Thanks for drawing attention to the contrast matter. I'm wondering how many people in the room have tried filling in forms where you can't even see the tabs to put in the certain fields. I find that's a common one, helping people in community centres fill in forms to teach people and get their disability clearance through the federal government. It's amazing how many of those forms have very, very poor tabs.
Any advice on how people can fix that, David?
Well, from a technical aspect, it would be about not hiding the labels to begin with. Like every design that I get sent from a designer, it quite often, it looks really fancy, but it's basically just the text field with a bit of a label inside the text field, but as soon as you start typing into that, it disappears, so then you have a lot of trouble keeping track of what is actually in there. So you should always make sure that the input labels are always going to be visible. It's really great to have that placeholder text in the field to give people a bit of an indication of what should be there. But once you start typing, you still need to have that field. So that is really a bit of a development aspect, making sure that the developers don't hide things like that. And also when you're putting forms together, using plugins like Gravity Forms, there are options for hiding the labels to make it super pretty like that. Make sure not to have those turned on because it will make it a lot less accessible. And again, I feel like Gravity Forms has started giving warnings when you try to do things like that. So thankfully, a lot of places are really shoving it down your throat as soon as you try to make it harder for people.
Any other questions? Yep, over here. Very good.
I'm Jason from AC Care, a social welfare agency. First, double-checking auto-generated captions is certainly really important. We often start with acknowledging country, Ngarrindjeri, Binjali, things like that. We've seen all sorts of, when we're trying to show respect and then see it interpreted in all sorts of unusual ways. Two questions. With alt text on images, if that image has text overlaid as part of a design, do we need to incorporate that into the alt text or will that be picked up? And secondly, on our website, knowing we do have a lot of visitors to the site with a range of disabilities, we use the UserWay widget, which offers screen reading, contrast control and a whole heap of other things. Have either of you had experience with widgets like that? Do you feel they're effective?
The Wave accessibility one is pretty useful. I have used that for analysing website accessibility and things like that, and there's lots of other Chrome and Firefox extensions as well, so it definitely can be useful. I use them from an analysis point of view, not from, an accessibility, improving the accessibility of a website point of view, but I feel like the color contrast ones in there would really help, because if you haven't got the color contrast between the text and the background, these extensions can basically flatten the website so it would be basically like black on white and things like that. It will lose some of the design and some of the charm of the website, but it will make it a lot more accessible. And that is part of the robustness of the POUR acronym as well, making sure that your website is robust enough that if you have extensions like that running, it will still be usable. So, yes, good.
Kat, did you want to just touch on that alternative text when you've got text on the image?
Yeah, and this is one of the things that we do have a lot with the ABC. We'll have an image and then we'll have news update and then text on what the news update is. So a lot of the time we'll describe what the image is and then text that reads, and then we have the text of what it is. That is one thing that I suppose a lot of people do struggle with, is text, lots of text on any social media image. So it has made us change the way we do things with ABCs and trying to limit the amount of text that we put on images, because we know it's going to be hard. But obviously the alternative text provides that. We started doing a lot of carousels on Instagram over the last few years that do tell stories from the ABC, and it is full on, text on a graphic, but every time we do those, we actually say, this is a graphic and this is the text that's on the graphic. So it's just a matter of making sure that they can still, with alternative text, actually identify what it is, depending on what it is. So, but it's definitely good to be explaining what the image is first and then what the text is.
I might also add to that if you have an image with text in as part of an article and you've got, like a pull quote or something in as part of the image, if that quote is in the actual text itself, then I normally wouldn't really bother including that in the alt text because you'll just be doubling up the content for anybody. So if it's in the text, I wouldn't bother. I would just focus on the pertinent parts of the background of that. Yeah.
Good answers. Here in the middle, Matt, and then we've got a couple over there. So yes, Kaylee, if you could be ready for the mic so we can hand off. Very good.
Yeah, just a question for you both in regards to the video captions. Do you have an opinion or is there any data on whether it's better to have the captions embedded in the video content or generated or added to the video after it's published? Just in terms of whether it's better to access or can you change the scale and things like that?
It really does. It depends on different platforms and what it is. Initially, when we first started doing video content, we did a lot of auto-generating captions in Facebook, but we actually found the accessibility initially on Facebook wasn't as good than us actually spending the time editing to put captions on and make them a lot larger. We also changed like that color contrast so you could see the text. When Facebook started, captioning videos, it was a lot harder to read for people with especially low vision. So we decided to do our own, but not everyone has the editing or the resources or capabilities to do that. They are now a lot bigger, I've noticed on Facebook. Instagram is really good. I feel you can choose the multiple closed captions in putting up a reel or videos on there. Same as TikTok, you can add that text in and you can make it larger. But just think, if you are going to add them in, we do at the ABC, we'll have like white text with a black background so it stands out and people can actually read it and see it. If you do text over colours, same thing, that colour contrast comes in and it's really hard for people. So if you are adding even the auto captions on, just think about wherever the auto captions are throughout the whole video, can they be read? Because if they can't be read through the whole thing, it's kind of feels like it's wasted being captioned and not being able to be seen properly.
Anything to add on that one, David, before we take the next question?
Yeah, I agree with everything Kathryn said, but my gut reaction would be that live captions, if possible, would be better than hard-coded captions just because they would be a bit more robust if you ever use that video elsewhere, if it needs to be in a slightly different format or anything like that. The different systems might be able to display the captions in a better way to give the control to the system, rather than if you've got it hard-coded into the actual video and then you go to use it somewhere else, the captions wouldn't be able to format or anything like that. But then we do have some of the issues with the system styling them a bit stupidly, which can be a problem.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is, as I said, it depends on every platform because every platform use it differently. Obviously, Instagram focuses on vertical videos. They're kind of going down the avenue of TikTok, vertical videos. Facebook, like we have a lot of TV packages. So a TV package is going to be different, on Facebook to Instagram. So we actually just have to look at the platform and how it's going to be captured for that platform and how it works. So I totally agree. Like it's one of those things that you can give one answer overall, but it changes depending on what kind of content it is and what platform it's going on.
Cool. Some questions from the far end of the room.
Yes. So for David, what tool would you suggest for assessing the overall accessibility of a website? You talked about A and AA. I know Google has one, but to know your thoughts about that one. And for Kathryn, what are your thoughts on using an image descriptor as part of the blurb on a Facebook, Instagram post down at the end? That it's something that can be used as well instead of alternative text.
So the main one that I've used a lot when doing accessibility audits, which is something I do fairly often, it always needs to be a mix of the automated audits to get the general gist of the accessibility, which I use things like the Wave Accessibility Analyzer, because that does overlay all of the different tooltips and little warning markers over the website, which can be really useful. And then it will give you a bit of a guide on every specific thing that needs to be adjusted. And in a lot of cases, it will also link you to the web content accessibility guidelines criteria for each thing as well, which can be really good. But if you're trying to like do a deep dive on how accessible your website is, you also need to do some manual checks as well. So the automated checks will check a lot of different things for like color contrast and title tags, alt text, things like that, which can be really good, but it won't be able to check that you have a background image which really conflicts with your text and things like that. So a lot of that sort of thing, plus keyboard navigation, stuff like that, and really needs to be a manual check as well.
And I think with adding the text at the end of the description, it's okay to do if you want to do it. Like, I kind of feel like the alternative text is like, if I don't know how you guys use social media, but if I opened a social media page and there's the image there and there's the text there, I look at the image first. I don't go to the text and read all the text first and then look at the image. And ultimately the screen reader, especially on Instagram, it will go straight to the actual image and then it will describe that with a screen reader before you then click on the text that's with it. So I think ultimately you can do it. We don't do it as best practice because by the time you went through all the description and got to the end of it, it might be null and void where the screen reader will go straight to the image, like first thing. So that's why alternative text is really handy because it will straight away give that description for anyone who's using a screen reader. It will just be straight away for them what the image is. And then if they want to read the text description, which most of them hopefully will, they'll click on that.
I think there's some more questions on that side of the room. Keep your hands right up so the girls can get the mics too.
Hi, David, you touched on being the only accessibility head in the room and having to have those fights with clients and even other members of your team. Done that. Do you have any advice or a particular approach, I suppose this question is for both of you, for still making things pretty? Like you mentioned, you know, accessibility doesn't have to be black text on a white background. So do you have any advice about that?
I would, and I did back in the day, I sent around a list of resources for the color contrast analyzer, things like that. And I just did a little bit of a presentation just to show people like the black and white version saying this is accessible, but then a really pretty version saying this is also accessible, and just kind of trying to get through the designer's ways of thinking, but it doesn't need to be stark and ugly. It was definitely a long road. Basically, if it was really pushed right at the start that it needed to be accessible, by the time I got the design, it was pretty ugly. And then if it wasn't mentioned by the time I got the design, it was like light blue text on a pink background and things like that. So it was lots of back and forth conversations. So it was just a bit of kind of persistence, just not being the most annoying person in the room, but just being persistent in mentioning it and making sure that people are actually thinking about it. But those tools are really useful. Like if you've got them, make sure other people have them, make sure that people have at least had a look through them. Quite often, if I got sent a design and it wasn't going to be remotely accessible, I would pick out the colors, I would do a bit of a report, and then I would send it back saying, no, this looks really nice and stuff, but these aspects aren't going to be accessible, and if you adjust them just slightly, then it would be, just to give the designers more of an idea on what they could change, just so they didn't assume that they need to throw it all out. It's like little changes to be able to fix it. Yeah.
And I think like when anything comes, like especially in social media or if you're doing online websites for clients, the proof is in the analytics, the data, the background, and if you're not actually making it accessible for everyone, you're actually missing out on a key group of people that could be accessing your content or accessing your product. And I think that's really key messaging to let people know that, you know, by doing this, you actually are missing out on a certain group of people that may not be able to see it or hear it or, engage with it. So I think that's one thing also to reiterate. Like I know when Liv and I always do reports, it's always like, you know, this is the data, this is who it's reaching, these are people who engage in it, this is the reasons why. And I think you're forever telling your bosses and anyone who wants to know, you know, what are you doing in your job, you've got to give them some reasons and information back going, well, this is why we've done it and this is why it will work. So if you let them know that there's a key group of people that are going to miss out because the logo isn't accessible to everyone, you know, I think that's a key message of being like, well, hang on a minute, we really need to look at the colour contrast. So we really need to look at what this image is and make sure everyone can see it and everyone can enjoy it.
So true. We've got one more.
Hello. So what do you think of the use of emojis in terms of social media and accessibility, but also what is the good balance of using it on different platforms, for example, like
And I forgot
LinkedIn?
that in my... that was one thing in my... Sorry. One of the things I forgot in my nervousness of chatting to a room full of 200 people. Emojis, that is another thing. We were encouraged 2 years ago to start using lots of emojis because they are eye-catching on social media feeds, and they do, you know, especially if you got a love heart next to a news story, you think it's going to be a good news story, I want to click on it, and it's probably not about COVID, hopefully.
Fingers crossed, kind of done
you know,
with that topic.
But our research team looked into it and they said, look, same thing as hashtags, as I said. If you've got smiley face, love heart, smiley face, you know, star emoji, star this, those screen readers are going to read out your 50 smiley face emojis and probably give someone a headache. So just like think of that as well. If you are going to use emojis, I wouldn't overdo it. You know, 1 or 2 may be okay, love heart and a thumbs up. But the same thing, like as a hashtag, as I mentioned, like every time you have an emoji, it's going to read out the description of the emoji. So you don't want to have multiple in a post and stopping people's reading flow of going the news today, love heart emoji, smiling, this, that. It makes me have a thinking about it. So yeah.
It does sound quite ridiculous when you start talking like a screen reader.
Yeah.
Like, don't you reckon? Like it just all of a sudden, I've been doing some testing on a client's website, and I ran it through a screen reader, and I don't know, just some things you don't expect. You're like, oh, yeah, we really need to fix that before we send it over to the client for review. But that's why we do these tests and use these tools, so that we can, you know, make sure that the site is going to be accessible to everyone, and that's kind of the point here. You don't have to have a disability to benefit from accessible media. Any other questions from the floor? Yes, in the middle there. Very good.
Is there any reporting you can do to see if people with screen readers are trying to access your website, or a percentage of those visitors to your website or anything? Like, does that? I don't know Google Analytics very well, so is that part of some reporting you can get?
It really depends what kind of assistive technologies people are using. If they are purely using an extension built into Chrome or using a screen reader built into the system, I don't think there's going to be any way for you to tell that. Whereas if it's a user agent for, you know, if it's a browser that specifically has it, it would show up as a different user agent. So in those cases, you would be able to. But in general, like if I turned on the screen reader on my phone and started going through, I don't think there's any way of analytics to tell you that, unfortunately.
No, there isn't. And that's the thing is like a lot of the stuff the ABC has been doing, and I also know SBS has been doing, is actually working with disability and accessibility groups and doing their own research to be like, what works and what doesn't work. And that's why we've changed things at the ABC over the last few years, because they realised we weren't doing enough and we really needed to lift our game. And I'm proud that they actually took that initiative, and we have a lot of people within the ABC who have disabilities working with us, and so it's just a matter of reaching out to those people or any groups that you focus on and getting their feedback, because I think that's how change happens, because we can all sit here and talk about accessibility, but until you're really in that situation and struggling to do it yourself, you don't know. And as I said, everyone get a screen reader, like it's already on your phone in your settings. Just go to your settings, do it, even if it's just for an hour, go through your website, go through your social media, just to get an idea of what it's like, and it will change your world, I promise you. It's just one thing, a little bit of homework from this conference.
So that's the first piece of homework we've set.
Yeah.
Maybe we should test people tomorrow and say, what did you learn? Well, I know Paul tried to set an exam that no one had prepared for, so that didn't fly.
You can and should try that with keyboard navigation as well. Every year there's the Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and I always end up putting up the same post because I'm disorganized. But I always encourage people to go to your own website, set yourself a few goals, like going through the purchase process or going through a contact form. Get to the homepage and then just stop using your mouse entirely. See if you're able to get through your website, get to the point of pressing that submit button. If you can't, then you've got some problems. If it's difficult, then there's gonna be ways that you can try to improve it. But you kind of don't know until you take your hands away and try.
That's it. Were there any other questions from the floor? Yes, we've got one in the back here. Kaylee, if you just run that way. Were there any other questions? Yep, one here in the middle as well. Very good.
Matthew's always got questions.
Doesn't he always? He actually put a really useful link in the Slack community, so if you haven't joined the Slack community, please do, to Userway, which I think was mentioned before. It was a really useful plugin that can help people to control some of those accessible elements on your website.
Thanks,
Kirsty.
Thanks. Thanks, David and Kathryn. That was very useful and important for all of us. This is an open-ended question, musing. Wanting to get your thoughts, please, on accessibility for neurodivergence and what we need to be thinking about in that space.
So I normally when I go through accessibility as part of workshops and things, I would include a couple of slides for things you can do for specific user groups. I didn't for this one because it was going way too long. But on my neurodivergent slide, I normally include things like the slabs of text, making sure there's adequate spacing, making sure sentences aren't too long, things like that. But it also comes down to color choices. A lot of it is making sure that there's kind of complementary colors, not too starker differences, things that would raise anxiety, things like that. And also making sure everything is nice and clear, making sure that if someone takes an action on your website, they know what's going to come next. They aren't going to push a button and then just be out in the wilderness. I have that trouble quite a lot. I, to be honest, have looked through university courses about 5 times in the last 5 or 6 years, and every time I get to the point of, downloading a brochure to find out about it, but then as soon as I put my details in, I start getting phone calls from recruiters and stuff like that, and that's as far as I've gone every single time because my anxiety just won't let me answer the phone when I know it's going to be something like that. So having the multiple options, making it clear what's going to happen next, and making sure there's multiple points of contact that aren't going to be too abrasive, basically. That's, yeah. And that's what popped up from me from Social Media Day last year as well. There was a bit of a focus on follow-up calls and things like that, and I was sitting in the audience thinking, if you try to follow-up call me, I'll never talk to you again.
I think you can catch it up on the Digital Adelaide YouTube channel, but Ryan did, we had actually a lot of sessions last year on customer journey, and I reckon that was probably related to Ryan's presentation on marketing automation, and basically because, you could use for example, HubSpot, and I won't labour on about it, but, if they've clicked on an ad, they've visited the website, they've filled in a form, cool, we can now send off a notification to the sales team to contact and outreach via phone, which, when it comes to, people who, to be fair, who likes being hassled by salespeople anyway? I personally don't. I know that when they call the office, I'm like, can someone take a message for me? I don't really want to talk to that person. Particularly when they're selling software. That happens quite a lot in our line of work. But yeah, there is that, consideration I think that we need to have particularly in today's sort of society where we have such a wide range of people, a wide range of, you've got your typical and then, the neurodivergent as well, but then also just, what people are physically able to do, what they're physically able to, can they use, a screen, like a touch screen? Is that, something they're able to navigate easily? So, I think there's a whole underside here that, I think that's part of the reason why we've spent, 2 sessions devoted to it and this Q&A, because we do feel that it's such an important topic. And, thrilled that you guys were here to spend your time and your expertise with us. Were there any other questions from the floor?
I'll be quick. Just following on from a question earlier, I know you've used a lot of testing plugins, David, to audit websites. Have you used many plugins that actually allow users to change the website to improve the accessibility themselves? So plugins that let them change the font size or the colours or change the navigation. We've used some with our clients. I'm keen to know if there's any kind of drawbacks to using something like that.
Well, again, the Wave plugin does let you do some things like that. And in general, I don't think there's specifically any drawbacks so long as the website is going to accommodate it. I have, in a lot of testing, kind of tried to do things like that, and suddenly the entire website becomes invisible, just because of the way that the developers have set up the actual website. So it's a little bit hit and miss. So it's definitely something to kind of go through your own website and install all these plugins and things and just make sure that it is going to be, better and you're not going to be removing things from people. In general, I don't think there's any drawbacks for it other than just not putting the onus on the user with a disability to need things like that. My goal would always be to make a website as accessible for everybody, rather than relying on one user group to have a certain piece of software installed or something like that. Yeah, that's basically it.
Very good. One last question, if there is any, but otherwise we'll wrap up for afternoon tea. Jen's giving me a very strong wrap it up, wrap it up, wrap it up. So we're going to wrap it up right there. We're going to break for afternoon tea. Just a quick round of applause for Kat and for David. Fantastic session, guys.